Hello and welcome to this week's session on your calling as a student. You have a reading for that this week and a breakout session. This is the presentation that goes with that. I'm Reverend Dr. Scott Ashmon and serve as provost here. I'm glad to be able to talk with you about it this week. You can see the presentation is entitled Windows onto Your Calling as a Student at CUI. We're going to look at 4 windows to help you reflect on what it means to be a student, particularly at Concordia University, Irvine. These 4 windows will be CUI's mission statement. Maybe you've heard that, maybe not. We'll look at that briefly. CUI's ethos or character as a Lutheran Christian university. Virtues as a main aim of education. And 3 types of learners. So we begin with CUI's mission statement, which reads thus: Concordia University Irvine, guided by the Great Commission of Christ Jesus and the Lutheran Confessions, empowers students through the liberal arts and professional studies for lives of learning, service, and leadership. A question for you. What parts of this mission inform your calling as a student? I want you to take a minute, pause the presentation here, and jot down some ideas about what parts of this mission statement that was just read inform your calling as a student. And we'll come back in just a minute, just click on play and we'll resume. I wonder if in writing down parts that you thought were important for your calling as a student, if you didn't write down liberal arts or professional studies or learning, service, or leadership, or 1 or 2 or all 3 of them. Great Commission, which comes from Matthew chapter 28, verses 19 through 20, or Lutheran Confessions. I wonder if anybody put that down. Maybe there's more we can talk about, but I think this is sufficient for us to get into is what does it mean to be a student? Our mission statement carries quite a bit in it that would inform what it means to be a student here. Liberal arts. Concordia is a liberal arts university. Well, what does that mean for you in terms of a student? One way to talk about the liberal arts is that it's breadth of study. It's seeing life through many different disciplines, not through one particular vantage point, but through many different vantage points, whether it's history or literature or sociology or art or economics, to get a big picture of life to help you be prepared for whatever you would do in life, all of your various callings that you'll be talking about in this class and other ones as well. It prepares you, the liberal arts do, broadly for life. Or maybe you put down professional studies, thinking that college, university is about getting in-depth knowledge to become specialized in a certain area, to become an expert in that. That's often the way that university is seen today, like at a research university, where you gain greater and greater specialization in a certain area. So that's depth as opposed to breadth. I think we can have both of those things. The university historically has been about the breadth, but it also got to a fine point of becoming proficient in a certain area. Or maybe you put down learning, service, or leadership. Of course, to be a student is to learn, but what kind of learning? We've already talked briefly about breadth of learning with the liberal arts, holistic learning, and specialized knowledge as well. So learning is certainly key for being a student, but that's not the end game. Service. What do you do with the knowledge and with the habits and skills that you've gathered as a student? How do they serve other people? This is a key component for us at Concordia. It's not just what I know, but how I can serve with what I've drunk in and become through my studies. And leadership. We might not want to think about this simply in the sense of I lead and others follow, like everybody's going to be, the head of a corporation or something like this. But leadership in a sense of leading people out of ignorance into knowledge and truth, leading people out of vice into virtue, leading people out of terrible situations into better lives. What kind of leadership can we provide for other people by our knowledge and by the virtues that we have? Or maybe you pick the Great Commission, where Jesus tells his disciples that as you go about, not necessarily go over there, but as you go about your callings, tell people about the salvation that Christ has won for them. Teach them these things. Our calling at Concordia includes teaching you about Christ and what Christ has done for you. And it's also about helping you to carry that word to other people so that they know of their salvation. Or maybe you picked the Lutheran Confessions, although that's a very big book with lots of theological documents in it. We can probably sum that down into creation and salvation. We confess that God created everything there is, the whole cosmos, the whole universe, that truth, goodness, and beauty are created by God and indeed are found in God, quintessentially in God who became man, Christ Jesus. That our studying is really then a sacred task because we are studying the works of God and then indirectly studying God. Or salvation, that we know that we are not saved by what we know or by what we do, which is a good thing for us because we always fall short in that. But our salvation comes because of what Christ has done for us, and that's completely given to us by Christ's work on our behalf. But then that frees us up. It frees us up for our studies, for our knowledge, our habits, and our virtues to be used of service, not for our own salvation, which has been accomplished, but to be used for other people. There's a lot in the mission statement in terms of what it means to be a student. This is one window you can use to look at that. Another window is the ethos or character window. We're a Lutheran Christian university, and that goes back to Martin Luther, the 16th century reformer. He was a theological reformer, but he was also a crucial figure in educational reform. He was the first person to argue that all boys and girls should receive a formal liberal arts education. Up to that point, only some boys got a formal liberal arts education. Everybody else got an education in the house, do trades. Only some boys got that level of an education that went on up to university. Well, he argued that all boys and girls need a good, broad liberal arts education. And here's a snippet from a letter he wrote to the politicians, the ruling class of Germany of his day, arguing this point. Luther says, "Now the welfare of a city does not consist solely in accumulating vast treasures and building mighty walls and magnificent buildings and producing a goodly supply of guns and armor. Indeed, where such things are plentiful and reckless fools get control of them, it is so much the worse, and the city suffers even greater loss. A city's best and highest welfare, safety, and strength consist rather in its having many able, learned, wise, honorable, and cultivated citizens. They can then readily gather, protect, and properly use treasure and all manner of property." Luther had a lot to say to the ruling officials of his day. This is just one piece of it, but it's a particularly poignant piece because he's arguing with them about what is the purpose of education and what makes a good society. He's plainly saying that guns and gold, weapons and wealth of themselves do not make a good society. Because if they get into the hands of foolish people, well, who could use, wealth in a bad way? Who could use weapons in a bad way? It's not hard for us to imagine those scenarios or even see them around us today. So his argument is that the greatest capital of any society are its people. And what we needed to be doing with the people is to educate them so that they are able, learned, wise, honorable, and cultivated citizens. Then, as they are wise and honorable or virtuous and knowledgeable, they can take these goods and use them to the best good for society. Now, if you're around campus, you'll notice that our fountain that overlooks Irvine has the words wise, honorable, and cultivate on it. And there's a bench in Grimm Hall area that has that as well with citizens. We've lifted these up as signpost of what our education is about, what our ethos is about. We want students to develop themselves with wisdom, with virtue, and to be cultured as citizens of this world. But also, you can take out citizens and put in accountants or teachers or coaches or historians or whatever vocation you'd like to put in there. We always want students to be engaged in this, this goal of being wise, honorable, and cultivated. So I want you to think a minute. If you want to pause here, you certainly may. What direction does this ethos give to being a student? How does this inform how you go about your studies and how you see yourself as a student and how you act? The third window we'll look at today is virtues window. Now, for thousands of years, a great goal of education has been to develop virtues. It's not just knowledge and what I can do with it in terms of getting a paid, career, but it's who I am and how I act. So virtues enable students to excel intellectually and also to equip them as citizens with a character that supports a good society. So you can see there's a component of the academic and the social that's going on here with virtues. Now, what are some of these virtues? You can see here listed some of the virtues that are key intellectually: curiosity, courage, humility, justice, temperance, prudence, and love. Maybe you're familiar with some of these terms, not necessarily others. There's maybe some order to these. I'm sure you could put them in a different order, but let's go with them as they are. A first step in terms of being a student is being curious, right? If you're not interested in what's going on with life, if you have no questions about life, it's going to be very hard for you to learn. The ancient Greek philosopher Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living, right? You're not getting at the riches, the depth, the complexity, the beauty, the truth of it, the goodness of it. So be curious about life, open yourself up to it, to discover it. There's great joy in that, and there's truth to be found, which is a good thing. There's courage as well. This could be courage to step out into subjects that you're not all that familiar with or don't think you're all that great with. There takes a level of courage to grow there. Or there's courage to stand up for what is the truth when it's unpopular. Or courage to press on when the task of being a student is difficult or even sometimes boring. There's courage in moving on and pressing on toward whatever that good goal is of being a student. Humility. Some people put humility first in order of virtues. Humility to admit that I'm ignorant. That you can see how that gets connected to curiosity, not knowing and wanting to know. But the humility of, I don't know everything, right? And then there's the humility of before other people, being willing to be open to them and listen to them, to be charitable to their views and not closed off, not to have intellectual pride about yourself or your group, but to be open and civil toward one another, to admit failure, to admit wrongdoing. Justice is important for various reasons, one of which is that it helps ground knowledge. If knowledge is just simply the accumulation of ideas, it has nothing to do with the reality. That's not what education is about. You can actually end up in unjust situations that way because there's not a concern for consequences. So justice is definitely concerned about the contemplative life and the life of action, and how those two get connected and how do ideas impact life. The justice is also to be found in giving due credit where credit is due. You can see this as citation. I got this idea from this person. Justice is also about earning grades, earning accolades, earning awards, various components to justice in the academic world. Temperance, not so sure if you're familiar with that word. We can call this calm as well. But temperance is not being given to extreme winds intellectually or emotionally or physically, not carried to the extreme positions. But to be calm in one's words and one's thoughts and one's actions and one's disposition toward other people, to calm situations where there could be great divide and to bring peace to situations. Prudence, we might talk about this as wisdom, knowing not just having the knowledge, but knowing when and how to apply it and to what good end. And if it's not an action, then it's words, when to be quiet, to be silent. Sometimes that's the best, and when to speak up and how to speak up for the good outcome. And I would definitely have love as the end goal in all this. Again, it's not just knowing that is important here, but what one does with it for the neighbor. So as the Apostle Paul will say in the New Testament, if I know all languages and have all knowledge, but don't have love, I'm just a clanging gong and noisy cymbal. I'm just cacophony in life. I'm not a beautiful sound of music that calms and soothes and encourages people. So love is what we're aiming at here in terms of the culmination of these virtues, love for other people. This is the goal of education. So you might, again, pause here, and here's a couple of questions for you to think about, and feel free to talk with other people on this as well. How might these virtues help our academic life together? Curiosity, courage, humility, justice, temperance, prudence, and love. And how might they, translate over to helping our political or social or economic life together? And what other virtues do you find that are vital that you would want to add to this list as you study here at Concordia and encourage other people in their studies? The fourth window, called motivations window. Researchers of university students see three types of learners. And these types are not fixed at birth. So as we go through them, don't think that you're set in being this way. And what they find is that people's motivations for learning will move them from being one type of learner to another. And you might find that yourself in various learner types depending upon the subject matter. But let's walk through them here. Three types of learners. One is called surface learners. What characterizes a surface learner? Here are some descriptors. Surface learners are afraid to fail, and they do just enough to pass the class. They will scan readings and take notes, looking for facts or words to memorize for the tests. They like lectures that give answers and information for the tests. They data dump, right? They study hard, but then they dump all their knowledge out on the test, and then it evaporates when the test is done. They don't keep it with them. It doesn't become part of them. And they tend to see courses as hurdles to get a degree. If there would be one question of a surface learner might ask in class, it would be something like this: will this information be on the test? In other words, if it's not on the test, then I don't care to know it. Let's move on. The second type of learner is called strategic learner. What are the components or characteristics of strategic learners? They're driven to make A's because they want the academic awards and they want to go into a really good graduate school. They manage their study time really well. They might even have a planner where it's all charted out as to how much time they're going to spend with each class so that they can get it all in a week, get all the assignments done, and study very well. They master course concepts and activities for that angle of getting an A in the class. But they're also often unconcerned with the questions or assumptions and implications of what's learned, right? They master the concepts and they do the activities perfectly, but the underlying ideas and how it applies to life, they don't really dive into that and go those directions. It's just doing very well in the class that they're concerned about. They typically will avoid hard courses or topics that might jeopardize their GPA. And if they were to ask a question, it may be something like this: what extra credit can I do to get an A in this course, right? That's what they want to do, is they want the high grades and accolades. The third learner is called deep learners. Here are the characteristics of deep learners. They're animated by questions, by problems, ideas, by discovery, by the connections between topics and knowledge, and how it applies to life. They're not as concerned with the GPA. Of course, they would love to get an A, but they're not bothered by a B or even a C if they have learned something and taken it in for themselves in the class. They're not afraid to fail and learn from their mistakes. They acknowledge that failure is a part of it. You can think of the scientific process, right? Where oftentimes failure is the only way you're going to learn and progress. They get into scrutinizing arguments and the evidence and the conclusions that come from it. They seek to sharpen and challenge their intellectual abilities and those around them. And they'll be the ones standing around afterwards saying, can we talk about this idea, this question after class? So as you think about deep learners, strategic and surface learners, I'd ask you to be honest with yourself. Which type of learner best describes you as a student right now? And you might want to just do a catalog of the different courses that you're in and where you find yourself, because it's oftentimes you might find yourself in being a deep learner, maybe in one subject, because it's existentially important to you, and maybe a surface learner in another. But be honest with what kind of learner you find yourself right now, which one best describes you. And then also ask the question of yourself, what motivates you to dive deeply into a topic, right? This is the motivations window. What is it motivates you to get into a topic, to unravel it, to see its pieces, to put it back again and see how it gets connected to life, to other courses, and to other people? What is it really drives you to engage and learn deeply? Right, we've looked at these 4 windows, right? So I want you to take time after the end of this presentation to reflect for a few minutes on each of these windows, right? The mission window, the ethos, the virtues and motivations window. What did you gather from those windows? And take time to talk internally if you want, or out loud to yourself or in the mirror, to explain to yourself what each window showed you about your calling as a student at CUI.